Did it?
Yeah, it's going now.
Okay, cool. It like minimized for a second. Outstanding. So I guess I'll give a little standard intro because a lot of people that listen to me will be hearing this. Welcome to a special edition of the 5x5 podcast. The butter to my bread. My co-host Rocco is on vacation this week, so friend of the show Brenton managed to step up, and we're going to have a little chat about some things that happened this week, their relation to you as a person, and maybe a little bit of the philosophical implications that pop up along the way. As usual, I'm your main man, Bob, and this is Brenton. I'll allow him to introduce himself.
Yeah. So my name is Brenton Lengel. I am a poet, playwright. I've had 7 plays in New York published, and I'm the author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, the comic book, the second issue of which is coming out very soon. I just got issued like my company is moving up. They gave me an editor. So.
Oh, dope.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. He's really good, like an old comic pro, and we're already like connecting because he likes writing stories about the afterlife. And I told him about my movie that I wrote about Buenaventura Durruti, and he's all excited about that. And maybe we'll do a comic book version of that.
Spanish Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice.
That's actually how I first self-radicalized. So I'm an anarchist, semi-famous. I got a bit of notoriety during Occupy Wall Street, and I used to have my own radio show, which was Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, carried on the Starcom radio network. While I was doing it, I had anywhere between 100,000 and 1 million listeners worldwide, including in like the Russian Federation and Africa. But I found that paying attention to the news every week and finding a new thing to be pissed off about was a terrible way to live.
It's kind of fucked up, isn't it? Yeah.
It really is. And just the editing of the show and putting it together and finding guests, and it would dominate so much of my time that I felt it was getting in the way of my writing, and I'd had some breakthroughs with the writing. So I was like, you know what, this is important, but I really need to focus on what I really want to do, which is to be an author and to captivate people with stories. And I feel like that was a better way to change the world for the better than necessarily being an activist or a journalist. But yeah, you can still find, there's an old episode of Insurrection with Brenton Lengel on SoundCloud. It's actually features Captain Ray Lewis, who is the former Philadelphia police captain who was arrested with Occupy. He and I are friends, and it's an episode where I interview him, and we have it ran for a year, and it was a great show. And I could probably get it back if I wanted it, but again, like I would only do that, 1, if I was making a lot more money doing it, and 2, if I had a producer to handle all the bullshit that I just don't have time to do.
Yeah, people don't realize how not profitable radio is in this country.
It's the worst. And then like you would have to like there were ways to supplement it, like you could sell ads yourself on like Fiverr, but doing the anarchist thing, I didn't feel comfortable selling ads. And this was before Patreon became really big. So I wasn't like asking for people to please donate to my Patreon. I just wound up being like, you know what, the little bit of money that I'm making, it's really not worth this investment. And as cool as it is to, be on the airwaves, like the literal radio, and as helpful as I could be to the movement at the time, like I was just like, you know what, I got to walk away from this.
Yeah, I mean, you have to prioritize your own mental health at some point, and then I mean, you could make an argument that as an author, you could probably reach more people with your activism. I mean, like how many people knew about the Spanish Civil War, for instance, because you brought that up a second ago, because of Hemingway.
Yeah, Hemingway, the guy who did Land and Freedom.
Oh yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, and also the Trotsky, which was the first time I heard about the Spanish Civil War, is that movie, The Trotsky, because they're talking about it at the beginning. Have you ever seen that one?
No, is that the one that's on Netflix?
It may be. It's a comedy movie about
I haven't seen that one.
It's about a Canadian kid who believes that he is the reincarnation of Leon Trotsky. And so like
does he get the hair?
He kind of does, actually, if I remember. And like he starts, like, his life takes this weird path where it kind of looks like he might actually be the reincarnation of Trotsky. And it basically, he tries to form a union in his school. Like, and the big like thing is are people honestly apathetic about the state of the world, or do they not know? And that's like the major tension of the movie. And also, is this kid Trotsky or is he just crazy?
That kind of reminds me of the Brecht play, The Resistible Rise of I can never pronounce it right, Alberto Ui. Have you ever seen that one?
I've seen a lot of Brecht. I have not seen that one actually.
I actually have a VHS of Al Pacino playing the lead in that in like the 80s. And
check that out.
I have no VHS player.
So you've just got a VHS. You're like,
I've got an extraordinarily valuable VHS with no way to play it.
That's really funny.
It is.
Yeah, Brecht is very interesting because it goes into art. But like, yeah, the thing is that I think as an artist, you can have a much bigger, especially if you're called to be an artist, you can have a much bigger positive impact on the world than as necessarily as a journalist or an activist, because art, it speaks to people on a very different level. Like, and this will probably get into one of the things you wanted to talk about here, which was J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that this week, man, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like, okay, so for those of you guys who don't know, and I'm sure everybody does know, but if just in case you don't, Rowling recently came out as like mask off TERF, and
not only mask off TERF, but like mask off transphobe.
Yeah, and so I paid attention to a little bit of this, but like J.K. Rowling, like I read Harry Potter. I was still in high school when I read the first Harry Potter book, and I remember there was like I was at this all boys boarding school, so
perfect.
I identified a little too much with Harry, and I remember that there was a teacher at that school that like scared the absolute bejesus out of me. Like, this guy was, from what I heard, if you got to know him, he wasn't a bad guy, but like he was just incredibly intimidating and loved to fuck with students. So the one time I actually ran into him, for instance, I'm like a freshman, and I go into the school bookshop and I'm trying to look for a textbook that I need, and I go up to like the counter, the woman at the counter, and I'm like, hey, do you have that book on the French Revolution? And she's like, oh yeah, it's over there. And I'm like, thanks. And I walk over, and I'm digging in and looking for this book, and this teacher is like looming over me. And I remember he's like gray haired and bearded, and he's wearing like a down vest, like a goose down vest. And he's just like, please. And I look up and I'm like, what? He goes, do you have the book on the French Revolution? Please. And I'm like, okay. Now go apologize to her.
Oh, Jesus.
And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, dude. And I go up and I'm like, I'm sorry. And the woman behind the desk is like, sorry, for what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't say please. And she's like, I'll get the book.
So you had Bela Lugosi in the stacks. That's great.
Pretty much. And so like when I read Harry Potter, the first Harry Potter, that was Snape. That's what Snape looks like to me.
In your head, it's not Hans Gruber.
It's not Hans Gruber. It's Mr. Reimers.
Yeah. It's a weird story. Like I think I came up a little too late for it. I'm in my early 30s. Maybe I was just too edgy. But the ones that I read,
late 30s, so
yeah,
we straddled it.
We're both missing it, I guess. But I remember reading it almost exclusively on airplanes in like the early years that it was out. So I have a weird tie from Harry Potter to the Atlanta airport. It's just a weird little sense association that I have. But I mean, even as a kid, and this is something that's gonna maybe piss some people off who are big Harry Potter fans, they were never that original. They were never that good.
Yeah, I've honestly been stunned by how good people think they are. I really don't think they're that good.
Well, it's a creation of an extremely capitalized culture industry. So like older children's stories didn't have the same marketing machine because they didn't have the same developed capitalist machine behind them to market them that Harry Potter did. Harry Potter is coming out of like the late 90s, which is give or take like 10 to 15 years maybe after the Reagan administration deregulated specifically marketing products to children through media. So you have this as like the kind of apotheosis of that. and it's also kind of a Star Wars for like a generation, but it's not great art in any sense of the word. It's about an extremely privileged kid who goes to a boarding school, who's richer than his compatriots, never shares his wealth, and becomes a cop, I think, at the end. Essentially.
Yeah.
I
Though
mean,
he's also abused and he has to live under the stairs because of his.
yeah, oh, he does live under the stairs. I make that joke. God help me. I'm a terrible person. But yeah, he does live under the stairs. And as an American, I can't help but to think that the entire story could be solved if one person had a shotgun.
Oh, God.
No, I mean, for real.
Wait. Who are they using the shotgun on? Are we just walk up to freaking Voldemort and blow him away?
Anybody in the story, if you really think about it. But like, okay, story begins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Voldemort's walking up to the Potter house to off the kid.
Right.
And then the parents don't want him to off the kid, so he has to off the parents, naturally, as you do. So if the parents had a shotgun, he's not going to get that magical word off before they cut him in half with a 12 gauge.
Or if he has a shotgun.
Or vice versa, if he's got like 5 guys with shotguns, that shit's over. or you know, the climactic ending battle, you get an M250 cal on that Hogwarts bridge, and that's it. Like, you're good.
You know what's funny also is this is implied that wizards don't know what guns are.
Yeah, so they're confused, and then you're just gonna slice them into pieces.
Yeah, because they don't. It actually says in like one of the, it had to like define what a gun was in one of the newspaper in like what like the mid.
It's a wand.
Yeah. It's a kind of wand the Muggles used to shoot each other with.
Oh Jesus.
There was a guy, this guy was a total dick. He was in one of the forums that I used to frequent, and he loved to spoil Harry Potter for everyone. What he did, but one of the things that he was constantly going on about is just that the U.S. government just needs to nuke Hogwarts.
that I can 100% tell you that they would drone strike the hell out of that school.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
It produced Magic Hitler. I mean, like, it's a training camp that's happening, you know, and not taking stuff into account like that is kind of what makes that story so useless. And it's not bad if you like Harry Potter. I like a lot of mass-produced culture industry dreck in my life. I admit it. And it's hard to consume stuff that's not dreck just in the modern media landscape. But the fan communities that have popped up, the associations that people have made interpersonally, are things that probably would have happened naturally if not for that product. They've just managed to monetize it and contextualize it in Harry Potter, which, again, it's not a story that there's that much meat to. And when people are surprised that the person who wrote a pretty much bog standard coming of age story that hits every beat and doesn't really contribute anything to the genre, actually really borrows a lot from other books if you're really thinking about it, is like profoundly ignorant on modern political issues. It's kind of a weird sign of our times that we expect the lady who wrote the derivative children's story to be like a political philosopher for us.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, Rowling, okay, so I will say Rowling definitely does have genius. And I will say that there is something about Harry Potter in that she can make you feel for her characters or hate her characters more like viscerally than most will connect. Like the story itself, the plot, is nothing to write home about. Yeah. And my you know, people that I work with, people that I really respect, like really think she's a genius, and they're like, oh, she planned that whole thing out, and this is really looking at her work and the way she incorporates things in, the way she has stuff pay off, like her build up and payoff. Yeah. I know that writing style, and what she's doing is she's just doing shit at the beginning. Yeah. And then later on going back and retconning it to make it important, as opposed, and that's an important writing technique. I do that sometimes. Yeah. But like, and then you act like you totally knew that was where you were going from the beginning, and you're just such a genius that you hit all these details. You really didn't. Now, but I will say her ability to create a character, like, I still get mad thinking about Dolores Umbridge. But the weird thing is that Dolores Umbridge, and this is, somebody pointed this out before she had her dark, you know, turn towards being a hateful transphobe, or at least before admitting it. You could tell that she was extremely hateful at times and extremely vindictive, because this was pointed out. First off, Dolores Umbridge is based on a real person. And
Okay, I can see that.
yeah, that Rowling clearly doesn't like. And like, if you can imagine, like, you have a run-in with Rowling, like you're a teacher or like a coworker or something, and then like you open the book years later and you find that version of you in the book,
Yeah.
you've really got to think like, holy shit, like what level of disdain did this person have for me to write me as this character? She also said that Gilderoy Lockhart is based on a real person, and the other thing, and until recently, I thought this was really funny because I had less regard for Stephen Fry than for her. Um, but I'm changing that opinion now.
Yeah. You
Uh,
should.
but Stephen Fry, he narrated the Harry Potter books, and apparently there was an interaction between her and him at the very beginning when like Harry Potter wasn't really a huge thing. It was like a medium thing, and he was brought on to narrate the book. And she kind of went up to him and introduced herself. Was like, "Hi, I'm J.K. Rowling. I wrote the book." And he apparently responded like, "Oh, great to meet you." Like in a very condescending kind of way. Like, "Who
Yeah.
are you? Why are you talking to me? Why do you think you can talk to me? I'm Stephen Fry." And the way Rowling responded to that was she noticed that he had a speech impediment that made it very difficult for him to say the phrase "pocketed it." And she then wrote that frequently. Like pocketed it is
Yeah.
in like all of the Harry Potter novels. It's used over and over again, and she just did that to screw with him, as the story goes. Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Don't sue me, billionaires.
She's sending the stormtroopers to your house right now. They're about to bust down the door.
You're gonna bust down the door.
You're
I said she's, but like also, the thing is that there is a lot of a message of anti-racism. There's a big message of tolerance in the
Yeah.
books, and it seems like her turfism flies in direct contrast to that. So what do you make of that?
It's a flashback to the neoliberal 1990s that we had, where we thought that we had the end of ideology and that I'm trying to find a good word for this, the very outwardly tolerant 1990s aesthetic that we had.
Mm-hmm.
We thought that was the end of history and that we had found the absolute right way to run a society and that nothing would ever change. So if you look at the villains of that story, you got the Voldemort guy who's obviously Magic Hitler, right?
Yeah.
And then everyone else, the problem doesn't wind up being the system that they've set up in the world. It winds up being bad actors in the system.
Mm-hmm. People who have bad assumptions. It's an overwhelmingly liberal work, is what you're telling me.
It is, and part of that is pushing the aesthetics, at least, of tolerance and inclusion, if not actually setting up a system that does it. Because you still have, at the end of that book, you have a two-tiered class system in the world. You have the wizards who kind of run things behind the scenes, and then you have everyone else who has to kind of live at their mercy, basically.
Yeah.
because she implies heavily in those stories that if the Magic Hitler takes over the Wizarding world, he's just going to massacre all the normal people with nothing to stop him. But
yeah, the Muggles and also like all of the non-humans. It's interesting because there is that element of fascism in Star Wars, for instance, where the Empire has a very fascist aesthetic, but it's very vague. It's like we act like we're fascists, but you don't actually see what the Empire believes. In some games you do, but not in
the main works penned by Lucas. And it wasn't meant to be like high art Star Wars.
Yeah.
I mean, it was meant to be a fun action movie that was World War II in space. And I kind of side with Adorno when he talks about what great art is. He actually writes a lot about what great art is. I highly encourage anyone listening to this to read some Adorno.
Now I have to read Adorno. I want to hear what he thinks.
He was so I'll give you a little bit of context about Theodor Adorno. Bro was a classicist from Germany. Classically educated from a pretty well-to-do family. He was about to teach college in Germany when the Nazis take power. So he had to flee, naturally. He's like, this is not good scene, man, I'm out, that is not good. So he somehow winds up in Los Angeles. So you get a classicist who you're in front of a computer right now, and
Yeah.
anyone who's listening to this is probably in front of a computer right now. Just Google an image of what Adorno looked like, and just imagine this bro in like 1940s, 50s, and 60s Los Angeles. I mean, this guy hated what he saw in Los Angeles, the suntan culture, the radio, the television. He hated jazz, actually, which
Yeah, a lot of the Frankfurt school hated
hated
jazz
jazz.
famously, which
Yeah,
is
I
like
think
that's the most ridiculous thing because that's like America's #1
like
contribution to music. It's like jazz and rock and roll.
pretty much. I actually understand why he hates jazz, and it's not necessarily the music, although he definitely hates the music. He hated the externally imposed identity of being a jazz fan. So
So
he hated
he was just annoyed with he was the original I'm annoyed with hipsters.
basically, yeah, actually, and he said the most dangerous man in America during his time was Walt Disney, because what he was doing was he was taking these fairy tales and distilling them down to very base emotional reactions for people to consume en masse, which is just a really gross thing when you think about it. And then you realize that you're growing up on these mass-produced things that are just designed to appeal to a mass audience.
Mm-hmm.
And he also kind of pointed out that in capitalism you can only produce as is profitable, especially in the culture industry. And
Oh yeah.
and this winds up having a lot of things that imitate themselves. And one of the thing that I was about to say about him talking about great art in relation to Harry Potter is one of the characteristics of great art is that it should be dialectical, meaning that it should challenge your ideas or have a thesis or just uplift you a little bit. It should be an element of discourse. And Harry Potter just is Walt Disney was doing to fairy tales. Harry Potter, the witch and wizard story.
That's a good point. I really hadn't considered that.
Adorno is super fucking depressing and ruins so much shit for you.
Yeah. Well, the left in general does that.
Yeah.
But though I will also point out that, I do think that, Harry Potter, it clearly did inspire some people.
Yeah,
Like
sure.
you saw in the reaction to the rise of the alt-right, the resistance people. It was incredibly cringy and annoying to see, but evoking Harry Potter and evoking like, oh, we've already learned this lesson.
Right.
And it's funny too because I always saw like Dumbledore's army. I always saw that like as long when I like not before I learned about Antifa, but once I learned about Antifa, Dumbledore's army, I'm like, oh, she's doing an Antifa, and of course she came out against Antifa.
Of course she did. Well, she's you can do Death of the Author on a book and enjoy it. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that? Okay, cool. Yeah. I'm assuming people listening to this.
You're saying we should track down and kill authors to steal
all of them. Don't kill authors, kids, please.
In Minecraft, kill authors in Minecraft.
Kill authors in Minecraft. But she's changed as a person since she wrote Harry Potter. Since she was the starving writer who wrote the idea on the back of a napkin. She's a multi-billionaire, I think, at this point. I don't know what her actual net worth is. I know she had enough fuck you money to say no to Disney making a Harry Potter theme park. And now you can buy your $75 wizarding wand at Universal Studios near me. But don't actually go to Universal Studios. You're going to get COVID right now. But she's like an extremely privileged multi-billionaire. And of course she would come out against Antifa. That challenges the system that made her a multi-billionaire.
It's a very good point there. And also like there were a couple of things that I saw. Like there's actually a stream that I do with Caleb Maupin, where we talk about Harry Potter, and he talks about how he sees the new left all over that book. Everything from like Hermione trying to organize the house elves out of literal slavery and it being kind of a joke, like, which for the record is funny. And if I were writing, I would go for it. Like if I were writing Harry Potter, I would totally go for that joke but like at the same time, you see both that Hermione is right, but also like the house elves, a lot of them don't want to be organized, and a lot of that seems to go back to like the new left trying to organize in the booming economy of the 90s. So like there's definitely some stuff there, but also Did you watch Magical Beasts and Where to Find Them, and then the follow-up, The Crimes of Grindelwald?
Okay, so the first one I watched, and I got really, really pissed at the first one, and I'll tell you why.
Oh,
The
let's hear this.
the bar that he goes to in New York is actually shot at the White Rabbit Club in New York, and that's one of my favorite speakeasies in Manhattan, and now everyone knows the fuck about it.
Well, that's funny, because like I lived in New York for 10 years. I'd never been to the White Rabbit Club. I never put two and two together, right?
Oh yeah, it's a great. It's underground. It looks exactly like it does in the movie, and you feel like you're in Gangs, New York.
Oh, that's cool.
It is really cool.
There was a bar in the East Village I read fiction at that looked a little like that, but I'd never been there. And then my favorite place, if you watch The Marvelous Miss Maisel.
I love that show.
Oh, great.
God help me.
Yeah.
It killed me when I found out that's written by the same people as Gilmore Girls.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, I'm watching Gilmore Girls. It's happening.
Gilmore Girls is not poorly written. Like it's poorly plotted, and they reach for they. I actually compared it with Game of Thrones, like the problems in season 8 of Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay.
It was the same problem. No, it was the same problem as Gilmore Girls in that they, whenever like when Lorelai gets together with like Luke and stuff, or when Rory, whenever a character gets into a stable relationship, they have to create problems for no reason and have the characters act like they wouldn't act in order to just keep the show interesting. Yeah. And similarly,
it has to imitate itself as is profitable for the culture industry.
Exactly.
Sorry.
And so like similarly with Game of Thrones, the writers solved too many problems, did too much fan service, and then started having to have the characters act nuts for no reason. Daenerys did nothing wrong. I'm a Daenerys Targaryen stand till the end. I mean, did nothing wrong till she like genocided a city for no reason.
Hey man, Ve Victus, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's screw King's Landing.
Yeah. They had my favorite like shawarma shop when she burned down, but what are you gonna do? So,
yeah, but the thing I wanted to bring up about was at the very beginning of Marvelous Miss Maisel, if you go in and you see the club that Lenny Bruce is performing in,
right?
That is under St. Mark's Theater. That is where I got my start and cut my teeth. I have read poetry on that stage. My early plays, a lot of pieces of them were written on there. I would go down there every Tuesday, my first year in New York, after work, and I'd get there at like 9:30. You paid like $5 at the door. You put your name in a hat, and you got randomly drawn, and you would get 7 minutes to do whatever. And like, people actually listened. It was a great space. You would see like some amazing poetry, some incredible stand-up comedy that you'd never see anywhere else. I once saw two people just throw clay at each other for 7 minutes. Yeah. One time a photographer came in and just took pictures of the audience for 7 minutes straight. Another time somebody just played with sounds on their phone.
I think I've been in there. I think I remember some of this.
Yeah. There's a bar on the right-hand side. It's like a 30-seat theater, and in the back is a back garden for talking and smoking weed, and
legal tobacco.
Yeah, legal tobacco. And my first, not my first play. It was the third play I ever wrote, but the first one I ever had fully produced is called Mike. It is inspired by my experience there and is set in under St. Mark's Theater. So I understand your pain with the idiot messes finding out about the White Rabbit.
Yeah, that one and Please Don't Tell. Are you familiar with that one?
No, where's Please Don't Tell?
It's in the Village. It's actually behind a place called Criff Dogs, which
I love Criff Dogs. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you know the phone booth in Criff Dogs?
Mm-hmm.
So if you go in there and you dial 0, that wall opens up and there's a speakeasy.
Are you fucking kidding me?
No, it's called Please Don't Tell. Now I've told, but Anthony Bourdain told on his show.
Damn it. Yeah. You telling me I could have hit a 0 in a phone booth and gotten a secret door somewhere?
Yeah, bro. Yeah, next time you're in New York, you got to do that. Like
I totally will after once COVID is over, and if
they serve the hot dogs in the bar too.
Yeah. Oh well, great. Those hot dogs are incredible.
Yeah, the one that tastes like an everything bagel. But yeah, you were talking about everything. No, not everything. Fantastic Beasts before we got off on this
So
tangent.
you were mad about that.
Yeah.
Fantastic Beasts. I actually it got hit by the critics pretty hard. I actually really liked Fantastic Beasts.
The first one's actually a fairly good movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie, and I really loved Newt Scamander. He's basically, I mean, she's doing Doctor Who. He's Doctor Who.
Yeah.
But I like Doctor Who. I like that character. I don't mind seeing Doctor Who again running around 1920s America with a bunch of magical beasts and his bag that is bigger on the inside.
Right.
And so I thought that one was actually a really good movie, and I also thought that he got unfairly maligned because he was masculine in a way that we don't expect protagonists to be.
Right.
And so I feel like people are like, oh, he's weak. And I'm like, no, you're just an asshole. And you don't understand masculinity.
It's funny because it imitated profitable things in almost every aspect of itself except for that.
Yeah, which then caused huge problems.
It did. And it shows you how influenced our collective imaginations have become, or the collective imaginations of the broader viewing audience have become, by the constant imitation of the culture industry over time.
God, you are depressing.
You want me to do it with a German accent? Your imagination is now limited. My German accent's almost as offensive as all my other accents.
So anyway, so Fantastic Beasts I actually liked.
Right.
It was flawed. It definitely had its flaws as a movie. And there were some things that didn't quite connect. But it wasn't like Cursed Child, which is just straight up poo gas garbage.
I've seen like summaries of the play, and I ranked it right up there with the Phantom of the Opera sequel that they did a few years ago.
I have a copy of it. I bought it in an airport on my way to Dragon Con, which has unfortunately this year been canceled due to COVID.
Well, everything is canceled due to COVID.
Yeah.
Except for where I am in Florida.
Oh, you poor bastard.
Bro, we're business as usual, and they're opening the schools in August.
Which is why wait. They're opening the schools in August knowing that they are now the global epicenter of
go on Twitter and look at like the hashtags trending right now are DeSantis, who's our idiot Trump governor. DeSantis failed Florida and DeSantis resigned. Like Florida is not running right. A lot of the private businesses are requiring masks, but there's no mask order. The stay-at-home order never had any teeth the whole time it was issued down here.
Yeah,
this is ridiculous.
That's awful. I'm so sorry to hear it because so many people are going to die. Anyway, especially now that I don't know if you've heard, by the way, but COVID, it's looking like there's a study that's come out that there is no herd immunity for COVID.
No, there isn't.
Unless you have very serious symptoms, you lose your immunity to it after a few weeks.
Yeah, this is the herd immunity thing was a fantasy from the beginning, It shows you the difference between the right and the left, the response to this whole thing, where the American left, such as it is, has been trying to come up with a solution that benefits everybody. Stay home, collective action, pay people to stay home and not spread a virus.
Yep.
The left's idea of a solution is a collective action that actually fixes the problem. And the right now, which is drifting, and I really hate that I have to keep bringing up like fascism when I'm talking about the modern American right, but their solution is kind of a fascist one. It's sacrifice yourself for the national spirit and the economy, and to make America great, even at the cost of dying, choking to death. And
the economy, blessed be its name. Feed it your grandparents as soon as possible, which is so dumb because it won't even work.
No.
The people that COVID is going to kill is also going to hurt the economy. So it's not like a win-lose calculation. It's just lose-lose. But they can't look past the Protestant work ethic, and they can't look past their brutal, frickin' worldview where they think they can they can force everybody in society to behave.
Yeah.
By not extending the things that people need to live, so that people then must sell themselves to a capitalist,
right.
Which has worked for a really long time for them. It's made them very rich, but also, now we're screwed.
Well, they also fail to appreciate something that we've learned over our lifetimes, both of us, is that the system that we've built over, especially the last 40 years since the 80s and the rise of neoliberalism and deregulation, is incredibly fragile. I mean,
Yeah.
just in my lifetime, we've had. I was born at the tail end of the Reagan presidency, so we've had the Reagan slump. We had George H.W. Bush's recession.
Hmm.
We had the Clinton boom, which was, for better or worse, it happened. Then we had the dot-com bust under Bush. I think there was another recession under Bush. There was like another brief one, like
Yeah.
after the dot-com one. And then we had the housing crisis,
Hmm.
and now not even 10 years after that. Well, I guess it's 12 years now in 2020. But now we're having the COVID bust.
Hmm.
The capitalism that we've built is incredibly economically fragile on a world historical level that we don't really see in history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's because like I talked about this, and I did a debate on capitalism. And what people don't understand about capitalism is they'll sit there and they'll say like, oh, it's free, it's freedom,
Yeah.
or it's a lack of government control over industry. No, what capitalism is it is an economy where profits are in command based
Right.
upon and I don't mean that in a greedy way. I mean literally they're in command, as in the capitalist class
Yeah.
must continually invest, or else people's paychecks don't get paid. Things don't, they have to keep throwing their money into the stock market, and they have to get overall collectively, they must always have a higher return than what they have in their investment, because one, that's how investment works. But if they don't, they stop investing and everything grinds to a halt and people's paychecks bounce, and we
Yeah.
have an economic meltdown when there's no actual reason to have the economic meltdown. And I
Yeah.
think at the core of it, like that's what's causing the biggest problem. Like there's a lot of other ones, but the fact is that we have a small class of investors, ever shrinking as inequality grows, who must be counted on to always constantly grease the wheels of the economy, and the economy can never slow, it can never stop for any reason, and if they don't do this, like everything goes to hell, even though we have all of the abundance and all of the resources and all of the infrastructure to survive, and thrive in a freaking utopia, like nearly a post-scarcity utopia, but nobody gets access to it because then they stop investing and everything goes to hell.
Yeah. You're talking about Baudrillard, maybe
Oh.
without knowing it. Yeah. He wrote about Semino. I'm mispronouncing it because I'm an ugly American and I only speak English, but it's called Semino capitalism. Is exactly what you're talking about right now. And if you don't feel
It's
like
cool
reading
because I literally made this up myself. But
Oh, did you? Well,
yeah.
that's what you think. Little French guy got it for you, and he made up the Matrix. He got you twice. But
Son of a bitch.
I think he actually wrote about that in Simulacra and Simulation too. But I'm not sure. You'd have to check. If you don't want to read Baudrillard, and I don't blame you because Baudrillard is a slog, Franco Biardi wrote a great book called The Uprising that deals exactly with what you're talking about too. And he also talks about how that system has infiltrated language, and we think of what you're talking about, that system of creating scarcity in a time of plenty and tying everything to the capitalist system, has become automated in our language. And his solution, I think you would actually enjoy it, is
Let's hear it.
to apply more poetry to our language about economics and tie the production of capital and the production of goods more to the actual labor instead of more to the automated banking process that the capitalists have created over the years. It's a short read too. I think it's only like 115 pages.
That sounds really cool. I
It,
will definitely check that out.
yeah, it's like $10 on Amazon through Papa Bezos.
Yeah, but not to get too far off topic here.
Sorry about that.
What I wanted to bring up was the next thing, the Crimes of Grindelwald, which
Yes.
surprisingly enough had very few crimes of Grindelwald. There weren't many crimes committed. There was a jailbreak at the beginning, and then
He offed a baby though. That's like the one thing I remember from that movie.
he did. That was probably a crime.
Yes, probably. I mean, you're in France; it's pretty permissible. So.
Yeah, he offed a baby, but and then basically, the worst crime that I saw in it, besides offing the baby.
Besides that,
but I didn't know the baby. I didn't care about the baby, so whatever.
And French, he would have just grown up to be like, "I am smoking." Oh, yeah. Anyway,
yeah, I don't know that baby. That baby could have been a dick.
Yeah. Some of the babies are good people, I'm sure, but
yeah. The worst crime against the characters that I knew and cared about was the hero from the other film, like the kind of kooky sister, basically raping the guy that was in love with her. Like, 'cause she had him
Oh,
under
the
that
chubby
charm.
guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I loved their relationship in the first one. I'm like, oh my god, they're wonderful.
Yeah.
And when they had to forget, I was like, oh, it
Yeah.
hurt a little hard. I had a little tear. And then like she comes back and she's like, oh hey, I've got this guy under a freaking spell, like, and I'm molesting him. And I'm like, what? You didn't even have to do that.
Yeah.
That's like if you okay, that's like you have a pickup artist who has a girl who's in love with him, who would have sex with him, like, out of her own free will, probably, but
Yeah.
he roofies her anyway. Except it's even worse than that because she's using the compulsion to make him marry her.
It kind of shows you Rowling's weird, problematic views about sex too.
Oh yeah, I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Harry in the books, he's in love with the Asian girl for a little while, and I can't remember her name because because I profoundly don't care about this series. Yeah. but then he winds up marrying his best friend's little sister, who's at least like 8 years younger than he is, and he meets as like a small child.
Yeah, and she has no like the actress that played Ginny Weasley.
Yeah,
super hot when she like came of age. I'm a sucker for a redhead.
Yeah, who is.
Yeah, but like, yeah, he winds up marrying her. Like, her only characteristic was being into him.
Yeah, yeah. There's that test. I can't remember what the name of it is, where it's two female characters have to have at least 10 lines between each other, not talking about a man.
Bechdel test.
Bechdel test. I don't think very many of the characters in Harry Potter pass that test.
Yeah. Well, I don't think so either, because it's two female characters. Some version of it they have to have names, some of it they don't. Yeah. But they need to have a conversation, at least 2 lines of dialogue, talking about something that is not a man.
Yeah.
That's the only test to see if something. It's not really a test to see if something is feminist. It's literally taken from a comic created by a feminist. But right. Surprisingly few movies and books and what have that. So, like, but watching Crimes of Grindelwald, one of the things that really stuck out to me, beyond the fact that it was so incredibly poorly done, like literally it felt like she had no idea how to write a screenplay, and it felt like I was watching a movie. Like, have you ever watched a movie that you've never seen before, but you don't really care about it? So you're at a party and the movie's on, and you walk out of the room for like every other scene, and then you come back and you're like, oh, what's going on? Oh, okay, I kind of get this. Like, that was the Crimes of Grindelwald, except I was sitting in the seat the entire time. I hadn't missed anything, but it seemed like I was missing every other scene. But watching that movie, what really occurred to me was she had no idea what fascism was. She had no idea how it develops, what fascists believe, how fascists behave. She only kind of knew a vague, like, fascist aesthetic, and simply thought that Germany went fascist because everybody was really scared of World War I happening again. Like,
yeah. And that goes back to the neoliberalism that we were talking about a minute ago, because there's a very pronounced discomfort with any ideology in that system. So when you think you've reached the end of history, you don't think of ideology. And writing from that perspective, she can't address ideology, because if she addressed what the causes of fascism were, you'd have to have maybe some sympathetic Death Eaters, or you'd have to have some Death Eaters that you would understand how they would become magic Nazis. You'd have to address the systemic failure of the magic system that she created, that's essentially governed by like a oligarchic bureaucracy. It's kind of almost Stalinist in a way, now that I'm thinking about it. So
weird.
and the other thing is, profitability wise, you can't really. It's hard to make art that addresses the root causes of fascism and the function of fascism and make it profitable.
Because it makes capitalists incredibly uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly. And it's a really weird thing. I've been watching Babylon Berlin on Netflix. Have you seen that?
No. What's that?
Really weird show. It's a police drama set in Weimar, Germany, between the two wars. The German dub is great because it's a German show. If you watch it in English, there's like 3 voice actors, so occasionally someone's talking to themselves. It's a little weird, but they're addressing the fundamental causes of fascism because culturally they're closer to it. But if we made something like that, you would just have the mustache twirling fascist bad guy who's behind everything and not address any of the political or economic things. Even her villain, Voldemort, Tom Riddle or whatever. Am I right? Is it Tom Riddle? I feel like
Yeah,
it's Tom.
His name is Tom Riddle.
And he's got a weird middle name that no one would ever give their kid.
Yeah.
But he becomes Magic Hitler because he's completely alienated from their system, and they never address that alienation that created him in that whole series.
They really don't. They kind of talk a little bit about like, and I think she was kind of following the thing, like the myth that Hitler was Jewish or part Jewish.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if we are speaking, quite frankly, about like genetics, we're all part literally everything. Like, we all have a most recent common ancestor that lived around 1,000 years ago, and I think if you go back to about the time of Confucius, we basically hit a point where we are people who passed on their genetics between like 50 BC and 500 AD. So either they are the direct ancestor of literally everyone who has ever lived and is alive today, or they are the direct ancestor of no one. Their line has been completely eliminated genetically. So, yes, everyone is part Jewish, everyone's part Native American, everyone's part whatever. It's in there for the most part, unless you live in like some weird uncontacted tribe.
But what about the culture of the West? I thought that was genetic.
The culture of the West, yeah, the culture of the West that that very famously, it's we're anti-homosexual, but we include Greece.
Yeah, and Rome. I mean,
Greece and Rome.
And they don't address the fact that Greeks and Romans didn't think lesbianism was a thing for a very long time, because very weird things.
Or I should also add, or the fact that during Shakespeare's time, like it was incredibly fashionable for men to be bisexual. Like, like as fashionable as it is today for women to be bisexual, it was like that, or probably turned up to a little bit because there was less fear of STDs during Shakespeare's time.
Well, then they invented YouTube and had the Enlightenment in the 1700s, and everyone defeated the SJWs, and that's what founded America.
Oh my God! What was really funny about that was during my debate with JF, he literally tried to say that argument that like the right runs away from the left, and the left always wins, but then the right runs away, and then the left tries to take what the right has after they run away. And that was his thing of like, that's what America is. It was people running away. It makes no freaking sense.
It's like it's like dialectical materialism if you're on DMT and a fascist.
Yeah, you'd have to be a fascist because.
Yeah, I mean, you would, because you wouldn't have ever read anything that had anything to do with dialectical materialism. But it's like, what? I mean, that's a defining feature in this country's history of right-wing ideology, is that it makes no fucking sense.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. People don't understand the left. They don't really read about it. They really only know liberals and think that they're the left and think they're communists.
Yeah.
Because I was sitting there, he's like, oh, the communists have never held power in America, and I'm like, Eugene Debs. We've never run the freaking country, but like socialism was incredibly powerful in America, and it was only really suppressed in the 1950s due to antagonism with the USSR.
Yeah. Have you ever read or seen the movie What's the Matter with Kansas?
I have not.
So the movie's accessible. I think it might actually be on YouTube, but there's a book called What's the Matter with Kansas that wonders why people in Kansas who are disproportionately harmed by failed right-wing ideology
are so right-wing
all the time. And he goes there and he goes through the history of Kansas, and Kansas had like huge socialist communes on it up until the area you're talking about. And they were materially much better off. I mean, of course, Sam Brownback, who has one of the worst names in American politics, cut taxes in Kansas so much that he actually had to raise taxes as a Republican.
Oh, jeez. Because he just cut them way too far, and it's not.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. And, that's the model for the Trump tax cut, of course, which is a disaster. And I say that as somebody who doesn't really believe that pure capitalism is the way to go ideologically, but I live in capitalism and I enjoy some of the luxuries that capitalism affords me. I am a shareholder.
Yeah.
I own some stocks and stuff, and this isn't sustainable.
No, it's really not.
Yeah.
Well, it's me the same thing. Like I always say to
Yeah.
people, I'm like, never go full accelerationist,
Mm.
because if you go full accelerationist, even if you're right
Yeah.
about accelerationism, you're going to do it too early, and you're just going to cause people problems. I think it's like kind of akin to the death wish that people have. They just want to make things as shitty as possible because they think that if things get really bad, people will rise up. But that's not even actually how revolutions work. Usually revolutions, historically, have happened after there is a period where things have gotten markedly better for a period of 10 years, 20 years or so, and then there's a sharp drop-off.
Right.
If you beat a population down and treat them like shit, and then just keep treating them like shit, they never hit that point where they're like, let's rise up. They're just like, okay, I guess I'm going to get treated like shit. Everything sucks. I guess I better just deal with this until I die.
Yeah, you know, like the one exception to that might be Cuba, but that was such a weird revolution with a lot of media apparatus fueling it.
Oh, yeah.
But
Well, fun fact about Cuba.
yeah.
And that is Buenaventura Durruti, one of my personal heroes, went to Cuba when he was kind of sort of touring the world, getting kicked out of country after country.
Yeah.
And he went to Cuba. He murdered several like Cuban bosses who were held to be particularly cruel bosses. So he thought
Right.
just kill. And for the listeners, I'm not talking about like people that like were just kind of mean and didn't let their workers go home on the weekend or didn't quite pay them enough. Like I'm talking about people that would beat and kill their own workers, that would
Right.
hire assassins to murder union leaders. Like these are the people that Durruti was going after. So he would kill some of them. And he actually, in his writings, he's like, man, these freaking Cubans are never going to rise up.
Yeah.
Fun fact. So then he fled Cuba and went to Mexico, and he met with a person in like it was another anarchist. He apparently met with them. He contacted him and he was like, okay, what I need you to do is I need you to put on the nicest suit that you have and come meet me in the nicest, most expensive restaurant in town.
Right.
And the guy goes there and he's feeling a little weird, like, because he actually sits down with Durruti and he's like, dude, like, what what are you doing here wearing this suit and like in this nice restaurant? This isn't really the right place for like a working class person. And Durruti's like, dude, I'm undercover.
Yeah.
And then during the conversation, the guy mentioned that he needed money to start a school. And Drew's like, okay, and then like he just went off and robbed a textile factory. The next day comes back, he's like, here's 1,000 pesos.
You know, that works really well because do you know who Michael Collins was?
No, who's Michael Collins?
Not up on your Irish history. He was the guy who basically created the IRA, and he is probably most directly responsible for Irish independence in the 1920s. I'm actually related to him. He's my great-grand uncle. Despite me being half Italian, you would never know it. But he actually didn't have a picture on file with the MI5, the British counter intelligence service. And he would hide in public like that. He actually one night went up to the guy who was hunting him down, who worked for MI5, that they imported from London specifically to get this guy, went up to him in a bar, bought him a drink, and like got drunk with him and then like left, and the guy never knew.
That like a boss. That's
like
incredible.
A boss. There's a movie about him that you can watch. It's called Michael Collins.
Collins?
It's on Netflix right now. Liam Neeson plays him. So I was like, when I was like a little kid, I'm like, Liam Neeson plays my ancestor. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm trying. So a number of years ago, I had gotten back from Iceland because I do like professional wilderness hikes. I guide people in Iceland. I've done it. Con people into paying me to take them on a trip through the Icelandic wilderness. It's incredible.
Did you sing Volcano Man?
No, but I should have.
Yeah.
But like what I did when I got back from Iceland, I was like in my Iceland shirt and I had this like ram's horn beer stein that I was drinking out of, and like I am telling my fiance, now wife, all about like how crazy and awesome Iceland was. And I get to this point where I'm like, and you know, I was in this shop, they were selling wolf skins, and like my wife looks at me and is like, how do you feel about that? And I'm like, I kind of want one.
Yeah.
And she goes, Brent, you can't have a wolf skin. The Sierra Club will get so mad at you. I know, because they keep sending me pictures of freaking wolves in the mail.
Yeah. They're watching you.
Yeah, because I was on the Sierra Club's mailing list because I had written North to Maine on the Appalachian Trail, and I'd done a bunch, and I guess the Appalachian Trail Conservancy had shared their list with the Sierra Club. So I started getting stuff like with like Bloody Wolf in the Snow, like please help. So I was just like, no, honey. I can do this. And I proceeded to inhabit this character of a guy who was just like all about wolves, trying to convince the Sierra Club to let him have a wolf skin. And I wrote it as a monologue and put it out on Facebook. And I was like, should I put this on the Sierra Club's wall? Yes.
Yeah.
Posted it on the Sierra Club's wall. And like, I mean, the stuff like it starts off like Sierra Club, Sierra Club, Sierra Club. You like wolves. I can tell because you're sending me pictures of bloody wolves in the mail. Those pictures are badass, Sierra Club, because they contain wolves and also blood. And wolves are badass, and blood is badass. So when especially when it's on a wolf and in the snow. So I guess what I'm saying is thank you for the picture. I put it on the wall with my other wolf photos. And the whole thing goes. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
No, I can see that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So like the whole thing goes down to where I asked the Sierra Club if I can fist fight a wolf so that I can deserve this other wolf's skin. And, I'm just like, haha, it's trolling the Sierra Club. I get an email from them, and I had ended this thing with like, please phrase your response in the form of a howl. And they actually sent me an email, and the first line was, howl! And as it turns out, Michael Brune, the head of the entire Sierra Club, who's a super cool guy, found that monologue, freaking loved it. They were laughing about it, at the office for like a week. And he then apparently... These other two filmmakers, Henry Joost and Ariel Schulman, were filming a tar sands documentary with him and Leonardo DiCaprio. And he ran into their tent and just did the monologue word for word introduction.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Halfway through, they were laughing so hard they were crying, including Leonardo DiCaprio, apparently. And they reached out to me and were like, dude, we want to make a movie of this. And I'm like, yes, please. And they actually wanted to get Liam Neeson to be the guy, because
I will have my wolf skin.
Yeah, because in particular, I had a line where I said Liam Neeson is the only celebrity who doesn't like wolves.
Well, he did actually wind up fist fighting a wolf in that
that
movie.
The Gray.
Yeah.
So like. Anyway, we were going to make a movie. It was going to go up on YouTube. It was going to be animated. And this was in like the hyper fun year of 2014. And then they got a movie greenlit and wound up having to do that movie instead of this little project, which is totally fine. And they finally got back to me and they were like, we're ready to do this movie. We've got some celebrities who are interested in it. They were talking about like approaching John Hamm to possibly do it, the guy from Mad Men.
Yeah.
And like I'm like, yes, this is finally going to happen. And fucking Donald Trump got elected. And everything went into like lockdown, and the Sierra Club were like, this is really funny. We love it, but this is serious now. And I'm like, God damn it, Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is the reason why that film does not yet exist. Yeah. And so please, for the love of God, and this is the one thing that I will say about if you should go elect Biden. Go elect Biden just so this film can freaking happen.
Yeah.
I don't care about anything else.
Well, I'll be dead honest. I'll be voting for Biden. He's not objectively the answer to all of our problems with. He's the answer to getting Donald Trump out of office.
Exactly. And for the love of God, the man has Swiss cheese brain.
Yeah.
He and his mutant family need to be out of office as soon as possible. And hopefully then he and most of them will go to jail.
Yeah. I don't think they're not going to jail. I
don't think so either. I think that they'd be too afraid of an actual revolt from idiots, but they really need to go to jail.
Those people that they're worried about objectively won't do shit.
Oh, no, they won't. But they're still scared.
They're still scared, and they're scared that they'll elect a worst fascist next time. But and we also don't send rich white people to jail in this country. It's just not.
It's a good point. We don't.
We don't. But like the problem I have with Biden, and why I'm going to take a real long shower after I wind up voting for him. is that he's a return to the giddy acquiescence of the 1990s without addressing any of the systemic problems. It's nostalgia, and I think Trump, in a way, has broken our political system, because before that, we had not objectively, our political system hasn't been functioning well for a while, but
Yeah.
he broke the veneer of seriousness about our political institutions, and he kind of turned it into a show.
Yeah.
And
he broke the idea that these
formality
are
of it.
actual experts and elite people.
Yeah, and while that's really satisfying for people who get their
Hate the
culture,
system, yeah.
well, and they get their culture from industrialized culture. They get their foreign policy from Rambo movies. They get, oh, excuse me, I'm drinking beer. Don't drink beer, kids. There's less beer. There's less beer for me if you're drinking beer, so don't do it. But
I am drinking seltzer water, or if you're a JF, I'm drinking beer, apparently.
well, I mean, you could upgrade to Perrier, but anyway.
What do you think I am, made of money?
I keep those fuckers in business, but but for people who get their entire ideology from mass-produced culture that's dumbed down to the simplest emotional reactions, Trump's the natural reaction. I mean, we withdrew from the WHO this week. Did you see that?
I had heard about that, and I know you mentioned we were going to talk about it. I haven't had a chance to look into it, but
this isn't super scripted, so again, like, we don't have to adhere to anything.
No, let's talk about it.
It's 2021 is when we're actually going to withdraw, and a lot of people, I go through right-wing comment feeds just to see what the other side's thinking and to test my own ideas sometimes.
Poor bastard.
It's funny because they're so fucking illiterate. But I mean, here's a drinking game for you guys at home. Get you some American whiskey, stimulate the economy, and take a drink every time you find a Nazi trope in a Ben Shapiro comment section.
You will die.
You'll pass out after about 10 minutes, because you'll find every Jewish pub and master trope, which is ironic. But these people don't understand internationalism. They don't understand diplomacy. They don't understand how the world works. Henry Kissinger, you probably have very negative feelings about him as a human being.
Because of the genocide.
The genocides. But he's also a brilliant internationalist if you read his books. They're a slog, and the trick to reading a Henry Kissinger book is not to read it in his voice. Because if you try to read it, it's like the world order developed after the Treaty of Westphalia. You're already asleep. But he wrote a book called World Order, which is a really interesting book, and it's worth a read. But if you don't participate in multilateral world order at this point in development, actually, if you don't participate in multilateral world order circa like the late 1700s, you become subject to it. Yeah. A great example of that is Napoleon. That's a great historical reference because a lot of people are familiar with him. Napoleon couldn't exist in a world order. He had to impose his order on Europe. And he wound up being subject to the multilateral coalitions that eventually destroyed him. And when we withdraw from organizations like the WHO, when we defy international order, when we withdraw from supranational organizations, we don't have the soft power to influence world order and our material interests, and we're eventually going to become subject to it. Because the United States is an incredibly powerful country economically and militarily, but we're not more powerful than the entire rest of the world put together.
No, we're definitely not. Well, it's a good point, actually, and I used to make this argument. So I came up doing nonprofit arts. I started out as literally as a nonprofit arts telemarketer, and then became a manager and worked for a number of like major organizations. And there was this bit of capitalist ideology that the capitalists themselves didn't understand, and it was this. So what they would do is, if they didn't like something about a particular arts organization that I was fundraising for, what they would say is, they'd say, I am so angry about this that I am withdrawing my monetary support. So I will no longer be giving you $100 a year because I don't like it that, for instance, like this very rich benefactor who I disagree with gave you $1 million. And I said, I would say, and I would train my agents to say this, to go, I totally understand why you feel like you want to withdraw your money. And here's why I'm going to tell you, you definitely don't want to do that. Because when you withdraw your money, you send the message that you don't care.
Right.
It doesn't, and why should anyone listen to you if you're not paying attention, if you're not an active part of the organization? Whereas if you continue your gift, but you say, I'm making this gift in protest of this policy or this person, they pay attention to you. That gets up to the highest levels of the organization. And like, you're probably not going to be able to pop out a billionaire who's just able to influence it. But they will know that these many people who give to them disapprove of said millionaire or billionaire on their board, and the smarter ones would actually listen and stay on. And, I even heard down that it improved communication between the organization and the people that were, and the donors. And the dumber ones would be like, nope, just withdrawing my money.
Yeah. And, the Soviet Union did that in Korea, where they protested the vote to have UN military action in the Korean War. And the result was a huge UN coalition wound up going into North Korea. And, with the arts, it's funny, the Kennedy Center is actually a great example of that. Have you ever been to the Kennedy Center in DC?
Oh, yeah. I actually managed their fundraising for like 2 weeks when another manager was out. I loved the Kennedy Center.
I do too, but a lot of people who don't like what they put on sometimes just withdraw their funding, like you're saying, and the result is that you get a lot of really cringy modern plays. Exactly the ones I'm talking about, where instead of having a set, they have a bunch of pipes behind them.
Yeah,
maybe like a door frame or something.
So they're doing Brecht, is what you're telling me.
You know what? You talk smack on Brecht, but see a production of City of Mahogany and tell me that's not a really awesome set.
What I'll tell you with Brecht's whole concept of epic theater.
I love it. So you're preaching against the choir here, but go ahead.
Yeah. No. I think it's really, really interesting. I think that unfortunately, a lot of the time it's lost on audiences. I think it's a little too intellectual to really it works on theater professionals and it works on Marxists. Mm-hmm. But like, I don't see anyone going to a Brecht play.
Yeah.
And if they're a capitalist going in, I don't see them actually being heavily challenged coming out unless they're already extremely educated.
That's true, but at the same time, it's also an example of not bourgeois or not finished theater that we see.
Yeah, fair enough.
And Brecht would also be super pissed today to see that his plays are still kind of avant-garde. He'd be like, "What are you doing?" Yeah, why is Les Mis still on Broadway? My co-host, my normal co-host Rocco, and I went to New York. He had never been, and we were going to Afghanistan, so he wanted to see some Broadway plays. And one of the ones that we wound up seeing was Les Mis. And the dude who was selling us the tickets was like, "Straight white guys like you keep this fucking thing in business." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's true. It's true." Yeah.
Well, I mean, Broadway in general, like, it's so expensive and the rent is so high. And also, by the way, 90% of Broadway shows lose money. And I mean that even the ones that sell out and win Tonys, mostly Broadway now is even it is mainly a venue for the creation and continuation of brands. Yeah. So especially now that Disney's kind of come in and gentrified and taken over. So what they do is they put on Saved the musical on Broadway, just because Saved was a good movie, people liked it, and let's just do it as a play for some reason.
Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark.
Oh God, I was in New York for Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. I remember when the casting was happening and when people kept getting horribly injured.
Yeah, that was cursed, man.
Yeah, I remember the Fringe play, the inevitable Fringe play that made fun of it, coming out in the Fringe, written by like a freaking high schooler or something, where her name was Julie Paymore, and
that sounds right.
Yeah. The worst thing about Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, beyond the fact that it crippled
It
the name
exists.
to those, was that Julie Taymor.
Yeah.
First, she made the antagonist Arachne from Greek myth.
Yeah, I've never seen the play, but I saw a summary of it, and I was really confused.
Yeah, the playwright that she hired to work on it knew nothing about Spider-Man, nothing about comic books, and they clearly had only seen the Spider-Man movie with what's his face,
Tobey Maguire.
with Tobey Maguire, because they had the Bonesaw wrestler in it, who is not a Spider-Man character in any way.
Bonesaw is awesome. I will hear nothing negative about Bonesaw is ready. I have an idea. I actually have an idea for a YouTube show, and it's a cooking show, right? And it's cooking with Julia Child and the Macho Man Randy Savage. So it's like, hello, I'm Julia Child, Macho Man, gonna make the wings so spicy. Going to the top of the spice rack. Hulk Hogan can't handle the cayenne pepper. Actually, it's also funny because when I saw that
an instant YouTube sensation.
I swear to God, I just need someone to play Julia Child. But the summary of that plot, it struck me as funny because have you ever seen? You probably haven't because me and like 4 other people saw this movie. There's a movie called Bunraku.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really weird movie. It's done in the style of it's like a kung fu action movie meets a puppet show. So like all the sets are done like to resemble a puppet show, and there's live action actors. But Woody Harrelson is in it, and he actually gives a summary of Spider-Man that includes Arachne as the Greek myth. And I was like, did they copy this movie that me and like 3 other people saw with Josh Hartnett and Ron Perlman? And I was like,
that's entirely possible. It's either that or they just, it was either that or Julie Taymor being super theatery, because we are inundated with Greek myths when you're in college.
They invented
they invented the theater, so you got this. So I took that to be Julie Taymor just being a theater nerd and not understanding comic book nerds, and not understanding the superhero genre. Now, that's sort of like on the level of like the freaking Harry Potter, The Cursed Child, because I remember reading The Cursed Child, and there was as horribly, awfully bad as it really. It's bad in every way possible, but I remember the thing that annoyed the crap out of me about it was there was clearly so little thought put into the script. And where I saw it actually was when they took it's one of the cooler parts of the first act. Mm-hmm. If you read the script or if you see the play, there is the like the witch, like the trolley witch or something. It's the witch, and she just walks up and down like with a cart selling like treats and cookies and stuff, like chocolate frogs to kids, and she's in every book and in like the movies and stuff in the background. And so when they try to leave the train, they are then confronted by the trolley witch, and she grows huge freaking claws and stuff and becomes this like monster. And like everybody like, if you don't think about it, it's awesome. And everybody's like, oh, it's this callback to this like obscure Harry Potter character and giving her this cool backstory and making her so important. It's the most exciting thing I've seen in this play so far. But then you think about it and you're like, okay. Because she's like, the train doesn't like it when people try to leave. And like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, so the trolley witch, her goal is to keep them on the train.
Consuming.
Yeah. And the way that she chooses to keep them on the train is by terrifying them by growing giant claws and attacking them on top of the train, which of course will cause them to jump off the goddamn train.
Well, it's kind of an unwitting metaphor for the way people preserve capitalism too, by terrifying people with like red scares. It's a mistake. I mean, I'm sure it's not intentional. And also, don't shoplift from the trolley lady. She'll rip you to pieces.
She'll freaking murder you with her freaking like T2 claws. Like she's a goddamn Dark Souls boss.
Now there's no scenario in which I'm actually going to sit through that entire play, because I refuse.
Yeah.
I opt out of a few things. I won't pay more than $20 for headphones. I refuse to do voicemail, and I refuse to watch that Harry Potter play. Those are a few things that I've opted out of. I have a lot of weird principles, but I kind of want to see that scene now and see how they did that in the theater.
I got to say that there are, if I get back to New York after
Yeah,
COVID
yeah.
and
I will.
to the city after COVID, I'm still
Yeah.
in New York, but if I get back to the city after COVID, like I will. And somebody like was like, "Hey, do you want to go see Harry Potter and the Cursed Child?" I'd be like, "No, but okay."
Right.
And there would probably be some things that I'd enjoy it beyond like trying to figure out how to kill myself with the staples of my playbill. Uh, but
I was like that in Wicked, so
yeah. Oh, I liked Wicked.
I,
It's
I I I was too edgy at the time that I saw it,
I
and
see.
by which I mean I was in my 20s, so my edgy
Oh.
period I guess extended for a while. I actually struck out with the actress who played the witch.
Wait,
uh,
you struck out with like the witch actress that played the witch. Like, are you
uh,
talking
this is circa 2010, so I
2010?
don't whoever was playing her then, because I saw her at the bar afterwards, and she still had
Oh, that's
green
always
on
fun.
her. And
Mhm.
the end was that I joked about the green, and then I struck out horribly.
Oh, that's a shame.
It
Because
happens.
I have. Let me see. I'm trying to remember back. Is there anybody famous that I struck out with?
You lived in
You,
New York, so probably.
yeah, yeah. Well, the thing was though, when I was in New York, I've been in a committed relationship with my wife
Yeah.
for like before we were together before New York,
Oh,
and then
okay.
so yeah, yeah. So I actually was not. It was really interesting with me because I avoided hitting on people because I was in love with her, and then there were times that I would meet people who like I would have probably struck out with
Yeah.
had I been trying,
Yeah.
but then they liked me, but then
Yeah.
nothing could happen.
Yeah. Because it's a availability issue. I actually
Yeah,
almost fought Henry Kissinger in Le Cirque.
I would. Yes,
So
I'm. Why did you almost fight him, and why didn't you?
so I had read Diplomacy, and I had read another one of his books,
Mhm.
and I was in Le Cirque with a girl I was dating, and I saw Henry Kissinger, and I'm like, there's no scenario in which I'm going to see Henry Kissinger again, probably.
Yeah,
So I'm going to go up and say hello. It's a complete breach of New York etiquette. You don't do that if you're in New
yeah.
York, kids. But I go up to
It's
Henry
all right. I
Kissinger.
did it once with what's his face, Lewis Black.
Oh yeah, you have to. He's awesome.
Yeah.
But I go up to Kissinger's table. She's following me. She's like, "Oh God, we're gonna get kicked out of this restaurant." I'm like, "We already paid, whatever." And I'm like, "Dr. Kissinger, oh my God, I'm such a huge fan of your work. You know,
Particularly murdering all those people, and yeah,
what's with bombing Cambodia?" But I was just trying to say hello.
yeah, yeah.
So he looks at me. His eyes pan over immediately to my girlfriend. Looks her over and he goes, "This is your girlfriend?" I'm like, "Yes." And he's like, "Oh, you're a very lucky man." His little eyebrows waggle. I'm like, "Am I gonna fight Henry Kissinger right now?"
See, like you ditch the zero, get a hero.
Yeah, for real. Power is the ultimate aphrodisiac, which is an
Uh,
actual Henry Kissinger quote. But
Jesus. Oh.
yeah, it's a little disturbing. But hey, it's a long American tradition. Ben Franklin was cleaning up in Paris before he was cleaning up in Moscow.
A friend of mine, she's an actress. I
Yeah.
met her in the Fringe. She met a guy that I had to study in school, Sam Shepard,
Oh,
and
yeah.
yeah, and Sam Shepard, by the way, very good playwright. I'm not knocking his work.
Yeah.
I think Buried Child is idiotic at times, and I've actually made fun of it, but it is a good play. I have to admit. Um, but like Sam Shepard, she met him in a bar in the East Village one of the times that he was in town, and she walked up to him and was like, Mr. Shepard, I had to study you in school, and your work's been so influential and stuff. Now he's drunk. Now keep in mind he's drunk from what I told, and my friend, very voluptuous actress, and literally he's just sitting there and he just goes, boom, grabs her breast.
What?
Yeah, just reaches across the table and just freaking grabs her breast out of absolute nowhere. Um, and I think at which point she makes her excuses and goes away. I don't, but I remember like years ago when he died,
Yeah.
like everybody on like the official playwrights of Facebook and all like the New York theater community and everything, they're all like mourning him, and I'm just like sitting there and I'm like, yeah, he grabbed my friend's boob. And they're like, how dare you try to Me Too this man after he's dead and can't defend himself? And I'm like, I'm not trying to Me Too him. I haven't gone to the press with this. It's just like, this is the one story I know about him.
It goes back to death of the author, though, was what we were talking about. And like, you can, J.K. Rowling, you can enjoy Harry Potter, you can enjoy his plays, you can enjoy, I can read Henry Kissinger's work on internationalism, and you can take the author personally out of it and just address the ideas. And there's nothing wrong with that. With J.K. Rowling that we were talking about earlier, the problem becomes when you financially support her and her anti-trans activism by consuming a lot of Harry Potter stuff financially.
Yeah. And now this is beyond her, just because I watched her thing where she did sort of the liberal, like, oh, the existence of trans women invalidates real women, just like how letting gay people get married invalidates straight marriage.
Which it doesn't, of course.
Of course not, because it's ridiculous. The fact that somebody else exists does not mess with your existence.
Right.
But like, so beyond that post, because you mentioned she really like doubled down and stuff, I didn't pay attention to her much after that. Like, what kind of horrible turfy shit has she been doing and saying since then?
It's the same thing. She's just perpetuating the same. She's just doubling down on the same argument that trans women aren't real women. That being a biological woman necessarily has a different experience than being a trans woman.
Yeah.
That trans women can never understand the biological experience of a lived woman. She went into the menstruation thing, and that's when I kind of tapped out. And then she and Chomsky both signed an open letter. A bunch of people did.
God damn it, Chomsky!
I think it was Harper's or the Atlantic, about how like they're being repressed. And I think this is an important topic to broach on this subject. When you have a bad take and people react to it negatively, that's not repression. That's a bad reaction to your bad take. And these people who are so privileged and ensconced in these, for lack of a better term, ivory towers, that they're never touched by ideology, they're never touched by material circumstances. When they see the slightest reaction against them, that's the biggest oppression that they feel in their life. And that is a serious issue with our system, is that the people who are supposed to be our thought leaders, God help us that J.K. Rowling is a thought leader,
she's got a lot of money and a lot of power and pull and a lot of fans. Like, she's going to ruin people's lives. She's
profoundly popular. There were a few people who were genuinely depressed when they saw those tweets. Like, I saw one tweet, and Twitter's Twitter, but I saw a tweet from somebody who said that, like, Harry Potter influenced their life. It was the thing that informed their awakening, their ideological awakening. And if J.K. Rowling doesn't think they exist, maybe they shouldn't exist.
Oh,
and
no.
It's like, and when you see, obviously don't do that. But like, when you see something like that and you realize how much the power that this person has, you kind of start to realize the problem with having a very capitalized culture industry, because this person has power not based on being a brilliant intellectual, not based on creating, great dialectic art, not based on contributing to the discourse in society, but based on having $1 billion and having an extremely commercially popular media franchise.
Yeah.
And that is a serious problem in our culture. And the right reacts to that by saying that our culture is degenerated and we need to go back to tradition. The left reacts to that by saying that we need to decentralize the culture industry, which, in my opinion, is the underlying problem in the system, is that we have this giant industry of culture that imitates itself constantly and will never challenge itself because challenging itself isn't inherently profitable. Yeah. So you're going to see things like, the joke, the women drone pilot joke, or I saw a serious article in the New York Times arguing that the problem with policing would be solved by having more women police officers.
Oh, God.
Or I saw a computer scientist, and Rocco is going to kill me when he hears me talk about this because he's much more versed in computer science than I am. But this computer scientist was addressing the problem of AI. Everyone's worried that Skynet's going to be created. And he's like, well, we have a lot of people who don't do violence. They're called women. So women AIs will solve the Skynet issue, and the culture industry, and Malcolm X had a great quote about this I can't remember the exact quote, but he was saying that, he was saying the white man, but really you can extrapolate that for society, would seek to address the civil rights issue by having pro forma changes, like having a black person on television.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that with the culture industry now. You're seeing people say, like, you have to pay for these diversity trainings that don't really work. You have to police yourself individually and not address the system. You have to have more representation in media, but that representation in media is still predicated on that same system that created the same problems that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And
which is not to say, by the way, like representation in media.
Oh, it's incredibly important.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong on that. It is absolutely important. But if you have, say, 24 as a pretty problematic piece of work in the last few decades that a lot of people are familiar with, if you just replace Jack Bauer with Samuel L. Jackson as the actor, or Morgan Freeman or another African American actor, you still have the same problems in 24. It's just got a new face on it, and you have to address those systemic issues.
The idea is that I think they think that if they can, there's an Onion article that or an Onion video that comes out, and it's like this woman like in East Timor has proved that like she can be a murderous dictator just as well as a man.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like don't change anything, just change the composition and things will get better from there. And I've always said this, and this was one of the major things about like liberal identity politics, even if you take like a Marxist framework, because there are Marxists who are very conscious of like liberal identity politics. Right. And I said this to a friend of mine. I said, okay, imagine there's a revolution of some sort, and there's a room full of generals waiting for the new leader to come in. And the leader who walks into the room is a trans woman of color. How are they going to react? And he's like, well, they're not going to listen to a damn thing she has to say. I said, exactly. Now, imagine this. Imagine that you have a social movement that focuses on a trans woman of color. And that trans woman of color climbs the social ladder, and we get to a point where those generals will listen to that trans woman of color when she walks in the room at the head of the revolution. That trans woman of color will be unrecognizable ideologically from where she started right now as an oppressed trans woman of color to an incredibly powerful trans woman of color, because the act of climbing that social ladder changes you. It changes your given circumstances, and as your given circumstances change, your priorities change and your values change. You cannot fix the system by taking someone from the lower classes and moving them to the top. You can't do it immediately because then they're not taken seriously. And you can't do it slowly because that process then alters them. It's not so much that power corrupts, it's that humans are very suggestible creatures. Right. And as we as our circumstances change, we change. If I went to prison, I would change fundamentally, but
exactly
simply by living like that. You going into the military and coming out of the military, we're a different person from day to day. And so like the idea that you can change the system by getting the right representation in, that a woman fronted Hollywood will not allow Jeffrey Weinstein to abuse women. No, they still will.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they'll be monsters by the time they get up there.
Exactly. And have you ever seen Barry Lyndon? That's actually a really good. It's a Kubrick movie, so it's of course very long and indulgent. But it's what you're talking about. But it's the tragedy of his fall as he rises through like the aristocratic class and the destruction of that character, which is also a very important story. So you check that one out if you want.
I definitely will.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
you got like 3 hours to kill.
Yeah, that like. I don't know. Maybe I'll write something about that if I ever decide to write a tragedy. I'll write that story. But because like I think like when we look at our political system, and this is one of the reasons why I very much focus on an anarchist critique of power. And I think it better than climbing the ladder of power in a vanguard style sense, what we really need to do is we need to be destroying concentrations of power as much as possible. Now, the only problem with that I find, and this is a huge one, is we got nuclear weapons hanging over us like the sword of Damocles, and we've got armies.
Yeah.
We would need some sort of either cultural or more likely scientific way that makes nukes and hierarchical armies obsolete. And until that happens, we can't really have a world revolution, because like you would have to overthrow all the countries at once, and then you would have to remove the incentive or ability to rebuild the system again.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's one of the problems that I have with anarchism in general. Is that it seems almost inevitable that incentive exists. And then, the other thing that I would say that we can do a little bit now is that I hate using the term the West because it's become so loaded by the right.
Yeah.
But in the last few hundred years of quote unquote Western civilization, we have developed the idea of a society based on consent. And preserving that and taking it forward is a very important thing. And that's
I would agree entirely.
That's one of the really important things about defeating the right, because the right wants to impose, whereas there are people on the left who want to impose too. We call them tankies. But on the left there are people who want to have a society based on consent. And the other thing that's kind of hopeful right now, ironically, that's kind of spurred on by the capitalist culture industry, is that we're seeing increasingly a global homogenization of culture, where people are having cultural ideas that transcend national boundaries or even ethnic boundaries. We called it in the 1960s, we called it Americanization, where everyone likes blue jeans and Coca-Cola. While there's negative capitalist connotations to that in a lot of ways, it is a kind of hopeful thing that we're realizing more and more as the years pass on, that people are kind of just people, no matter where they live. So that's a good thing.
It is incredibly hopeful. It's one of the things that I found, like when I found out that the Somali pirates all found Jack Sparrow incredibly inspiring and wanted to be Jack Sparrow. I'm like, aw.
Yeah. Oh, now the Navy SEALs are going to butcher you, but
but that's still, like, man. I don't know. I would love to be a pirate if you didn't have to rob and
murder people. You just want to get on a boat. That's what you want to do.
I want to get on a boat and live essentially as an anarchist. And
and the other problem with anarchism is Steiner ran into this, that you still exist in a capitalist framework.
Like in an anarchist society, or like
no, as an anarchist, as like a present day anarchist. So. Ideologically, you have goals and you're working towards those, but you still kind of have to exist in a wage society. Yeah. He had the famous example when he tried to found his milk collective, and it didn't really work out.
Stirner tried to form a milk collective.
Yeah, he did. He got an inheritance. I believe it was from his wife's father, and he had the brilliant idea of founding an anarchist milk collective, and it failed spectacularly.
I can see exactly how and why it would. Well, I mean, overall, I think anarchism, I do think we will eventually move to, this is what, I think eventually either humanity will wipe itself out, or we will eventually move to some sort of a post-capitalist, hopefully something in the realm of like an anarcho-communist society where we're no longer using money, and I'd almost see it kind of as, take Rivendell, and just add technology.
Yeah. Elrond definitely had an iPad, man.
Oh yeah, just like technological elves. Can we just do that? Can we please do that? Because I think we're either going to do that or we're going to wipe ourselves out.
Just so long as you don't run into Warhammer 40K, because they actually have technological elves in 40K.
Yeah, but those aren't they like cyberpunk technological elves?
I'll get off on a tangent for a minute. So here's your little 40K nerd out if you've listened this long. So in 40K, the elves had a kind of post-scarcity society, and they just became so hedonistic that their hedonism created a literal god of hedonism that devoured most of their souls. and like the surviving elves are either like Hellraiser elves who are consuming souls to sustain themselves, or they're very dour. They're collectivized, I guess, but they're very dour. They have to live very aesthetically in
So
order to.
they went either Vulcans or orcs.
Or orcs, basically. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, of course, 40K is not a society that you would ever want to live in. But,
No.
no.
This is, it's really funny because I remember I was big into Dungeons and Dragons, and when I was like a teenager, I eventually went to a Games Workshop, and I wanted to get into Warhammer, but it was just I was already into Magic the Gathering, and my mom was not going to pay for nor allow me to pay for Warhammer.
Oh God, they're so overpriced. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So I went into the Games Workshop and I was talking to one of the employees, and I was like, this would like be really cool if you combined this with an RPG. And now me thinking of it was like you do it like on the scale of like large campaigns and global conflict, the storytelling aspect, as opposed to like the individual battles that they had worked out. And the guy looked at me and he goes, "No, because then you'd have to work in levels." And I'm like, what? Like he was only thinking about the mechanics of the game as opposed to what an RPG actually does and is.
And it's funny because they've actually done that since.
Oh yeah, well of course.
Yeah.
Warhammer 40K, please hire me.
I actually infuriated Commander Neckbeard at a 40K game.
Oh yeah.
Because I built an army of the Emperor's bodyguards. This is super nerdy. So they're basically gold-clad badasses, and there's a guy who did a parody series which is really funny called "If the Emperor Had a Text-to-Speech Device." It's hilarious. It's a hilarious series, and he puts a bunch of very fey Adeptus Custodes who are like super buff, but they're very fey at the same time.
Sounds amazing.
And they play the Pillarmen theme from JoJo, which is like like Arabic techno, and it's like super, and so he's trying to like role play his army, and I was just getting annoyed with him, and I just started playing that song on repeat every time I had a turn.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
Yeah,
I drove some people crazy at a Vampire the Masquerade LARP.
Oh my God, I have a story about that after you're done. This is a really funny story.
I showed up as a Ravnos, and my character
Venture for life.
Yeah, my character was a Ravnos drunken boxer who wore a cowboy hat and a turkey shirt.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so and he was an alcoholic in that he was like addicted to drinking people who were on alcohol.
Drunk,
yeah. And so like you had all these and I'm in the goth scene, so I understand goths. I just like screw with them on occasion, trying to do their but then like really seriously go back and do the paper rock scissors because it was a LARP. And I'm just like sitting there in the cowboy hat and I got murdered horribly in game. But it was so worth it.
So I was in Daytona, which is the area I'm living in now, and I was coming out of a really shitty club that we have here called Razzles. It's terrible. Don't go in there. And I had not one too many. I had 7 or 8 too many to drink that night. And I walk out, and there's this kid, and he's standing on top of a car. Mm-hmm. And they're LARPing. I didn't know they were LARPing. But he's standing on top of a car, and he's got his hands crossed over his chest like in the coffin pose, and both of his fingers are crossed. And I'm like, I'm looking at this kid, and I'm like, I know him. And I'm like, what are you doing? Because I'm exactly like that. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm looking at him. I'm like, what are you doing? And because I'm drunk enough to try to figure out the logic of this. Yeah. And he's like, the sheriff of Daytona is over there, and she's gonna kill me. I'm invisible right now. And I'm like, you're not invisible. I can see you. And like he's trying to explain it to me. And I'm like, do you need help?
Can I help? Where's the sheriff?
Where's the sheriff? The sheriff's gonna kill you. What do you do? And then I guess he like broke it to try to talk to me. And this overweight woman in a trench coat starts chasing him down with an airsoft pistol. And like he runs off, she runs off. I'm just like, I need a taxi.
What the hell's going on? It's a good thing you were drunk and not like on LSD or something.
Yeah, dude, I would have been fucked up. Like, don't LARP in a concealed carry state, kids. That's the moral of the story.
Dude, I'll tell you what I've always wanted to do and I haven't LARPed in years, except, at protest. No, I'm kidding. I haven't LARPed in years, but what I've always wanted to do is go to a Vampire the Masquerade LARP. And so there's a thing, because you know how like with VTM, everything is all one contained universe. So Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Ascension, Werewolf the Apocalypse, they're all in one self-contained world. Everything that White Wolf publishes uses the same rules and is in arguably the same universe, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. There is another lesser known RPG that White Wolf put out using the White Wolf rules.
Do I need to get another IPA?
Street Fighter.
Wait, they have a Street Fighter or LARP? Like, I think that's just called Fight Club.
Yeah. And so like what I have always wanted to do is to go like get my Kyokushin gi and be Ryu. And go to a freaking VTM LARP and be obsessed like, I must get more powerful.
Oh, God.
And freaking start handing out like freaking dragon punches and and Hadoukens at people. I will again be murdered about as quickly. But
I just have a problem. I boxed too long. I can't really pull my punches anymore.
Yeah. You should be able to punches pretty well if you boxed a while.
I can do it for sparring, but I can only hit you at like 30% power, which at a LARPing convention isn't going to really work out too good.
I learned really well how to pull my punches at before I did Kyokushin, I did a fusion of Goju-Ryu and Taekwondo. Through my actual high school. Like my high school had its own martial arts class, and the guy who taught me, Mr. Bertram, was a former kickboxer. So what he did to teach us was a bunch of like, I was 17, 18 years old. He had a bunch of 17, 18-year-old boys in an actual high school, like in like South Central Kentucky. And what he did was he lined us up in horse stance facing each other, and we had to punch each other in the crotch.
Oh no.
But only touch, and the goal was to touch the gi, but not actually hit the person in the nuts.
Just the tip.
Yeah, exactly. And you knew, because one, we're a bunch of fairly homophobic young men, so it's like I don't want to touch his dick. Yeah. And I also don't want to hit him in the crotch, because then he's just going to get up and nail me in the crotch.
Right.
So we learned to properly, and like we got to a point where we could just fire off punches, and literally I blew some people's minds in college, because I sat there and people were like, oh yeah, how much control can you really have? And I kind of went like this, and I threw a punch, and I touched the eyebrow of the guy down the hall from me. And then pulled back.
That'll do it.
It was a full speed punch, and it was not luck. Like I knew exactly how far my fist was going to go. I wouldn't trust myself to do that after Kyokushin.
Yeah. Because it's full contact, and you really want to hit somebody to kill them.
Yeah. But oh, dude, it's so freaking funny, by the way, too, because some of the comments on the Sargon debate I did was for people running in going, oh, Kyokushin isn't real martial arts. You should do BJJ, bro.
Well,
and I'm like, oh, you guys have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, I kind of can excuse them for that, because with the exception of Kyokushin and like some Shotokan, like everyone I've met who has a traditional martial arts background can't fight for shit.
Oh, yeah.
And this is, I promise this may be one of the last tangential stories I'll tell. I was boxing, and I was in this gym, and the gym was run by this guy named Tiger Lee, who wasn't Tiger Lee, whatever the YMCA karate brand is, but he was this like chubby old Asian guy who was a murderer. I don't think he actually killed anybody, but he would murder you in a fight. And I was sparring in a ring, and this kid comes in. His name is Dan, and he tells them that he has a traditional martial arts background. So they're like, okay, whatever, kid. So they run him through a couple punching bag drills, and he says he wants to spar with somebody. I'm the dude in the ring, so he's like, get in the ring with Bob there. And I'm like, oh, God, I don't want to hurt this kid. But we're wearing MMA gloves, because it was like a BJJ MMA style place. I was trying to learn kickboxing for footwork. And we get in, and we're circling. He's in this really weird Karate Kid stupid stance that doesn't work in real life.
Oh, he's doing he's doing something like this, like
Yeah, something akin to that, or it's even worse than that. I think he had his like hands like in some weird like kung fu thing.
oh, was he doing like the knife hand, like the?
Yeah, something like that. And
Oh, that's
it didn't work. It didn't work out too good for him. So we're circling for like 20 seconds. I'm like, I gotta hit him. I have to. That's how this works.
yeah.
So I popped him with like a decent jab, and he does a backflip. And I was like, I didn't hit him that hard, but he did like a legitimate backflip to his credit. And he comes up and he brings his hand up flat and he blows like Sonya's fatality in MK1. And then he acts like he won. And everyone in the gym has the same look on their face that you have right now. And they're all looking at this kid, and he's like, "That was my ninja dust. I killed you." Because he had been in some bullshit ninja dojo where they taught him that he could have poison ninja dust that he would blow in somebody's face and murder them.
Oh my God.
And that was his.
But you're. Would you...
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like he really thought that was legitimate, and he thought he knew the kata Dante. Are you familiar with that? Like,
you mean Count Dante?
Yeah, so he knew all
the inspiration for Mr. Satan in Dragon Ball Z.
Exactly correct.
That shit insane Count Dante.
There's like a 25 hit combination that he invented that will allegedly murder somebody. That involves like ripping parts of their face off with your bare hands or something.
Yeah. The freaking Dojo Wars. Like, there's a great podcast called The Dollop. Look it up. They have a whole thing about the Dojo Wars.
I've listened to that one actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing is also, I've noticed that there is a push on, like on YouTube. There's like they did a whole thing of like exposing fake martial arts.
Oh, that's like one of my favorite things.
Yeah. Or rating traditional martial arts. What they don't understand is like, okay, so like freaking Kyokushin, first of all, like almost every like crazy badass is based on Masoyama.
Yeah.
Like Cobra Kai is called Cobra Kai because the term for a Kyokushin practitioner is Kyokushin Kai.
Yeah, that dude was a murderer. That guy was.
Yeah. He beat up like a bunch of American GIs. He lived in the freaking wilderness. If you watch, you've seen Hunter x Hunter, right?
No, I actually don't watch a lot of anime.
Oh man, you brought up JoJo. So yeah. So Hunter x Hunter, if there's a Hunter x Hunter fan, like Netero, Chairman Netero, who is involved in like probably the greatest anime fight ever in the 5th season of Hunter x Hunter, is very clearly based on the life of Masoyama. Like being an insane guy who's like kind of out of his mind, but obsessed with the martial arts and goes into the wilderness for years perfecting his style. Like that is Masoyama. And then of course Masoyama comes out and fist fights bulls.
Oh yeah. Well, that sounds like that sounds like a story that's kind of based on Roberto Duran, the famous Puerto Rican boxer. Not Puerto Rican, excuse me, Panamanian. Sorry, kids.
Did he also fight bulls?
He knocked out a donkey with one punch when he was like 12.
Oh, like they had Conan do that in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Roberto Duran, incredible badass. First guy to beat Sugar Ray Leonard, not John, Robinson. He had professional wins in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s as a boxer. Like,
yeah,
unquestionably the best at 135.
Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah, no,
that's boxing nerd stuff.
Yeah, you can see Masoyama on video. Like, it's a little fucked up because like he's got the bull by like I think they had like a rope around it, but also it's a goddamn bull.
Yeah, that's not easy to knock out, man. I can knock out a man, but I ain't messing with livestock.
Yeah, and so like it's literally like him just like bang, and like literally he was able to chop some of their horns off. Some of them he wrestled to the ground and defeated, and others he just beat to death with his bare hands. Yeah, and this guy created Kyokushin. So like Kyokushin forms the basis of a number of MMA stuff, and it's even Ryu from like if you read the manual on Street Fighter, it will say that Ryu does Shotokan. And there is a reason why it says that, because Shotokan is in the public domain. And at the time they were making it, Masoyama was still alive.
And he had a copyright?
I think he did. Basically, Ryu is a Kyokushin fighter. If you actually watch the way he moves in the games and the way he talks and like, yeah, Ryu does Kyokushin karate, and except for like the
the stuff that's
ridiculous
physically impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, and he is actually based on a famous Kyokushin fighter who famously beat a Muay Thai champion in the 70s.
Oh, geez.
And that's why Sagat is the boss of the first Street Fighter.
Oh, that's trippy. That's like how Johnny Cage is based on Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah.
Because Mortal Kombat was originally the Bloodsport game.
Exactly.
Which Johnny Cage, unquestionably the champion of any fighting game, because he enters a tournament filled with gods, zombies, demons, four-armed men, and he's like, I bet those things have balls, and I'm going to punch them in them.
Right in the ball.
Right in the balls. Yeah. Greatest fighting game character ever.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
And I run into the same thing. It's funny with boxing, is that a lot of people don't think boxing is a legitimate form of self-defense anymore. Like, I get a lot of those BJJ chads who listen to too much Joe Rogan, who Joe Rogan actually disagrees with him, which is the funny thing. But like, they're like, all fights go to the ground. It's like, yes, they go to the ground when I put you there with a right hook, dude. Like, good luck, And then I ran into that in the army too, which the army has a thing called combatives, which is basically BJJ and Sambo had like a kid, basically. Ooh. And that's what army combatives is. And so they teach you how to grapple first, which is just very silly. Because it's like, if you're in a serious combat situation and you try to take a guy in your guard, his friend is going to soccer kick you in the head.
Exactly. Grappling is great against a single opponent in controlled circumstances.
Exactly. And it's useful to have too, even if you're in a group, but like, you need to learn how to strike. And it's funny because the army, to get a level 1 combative certification, they do a thing called the clinch drill, where they don't teach you how to punch at all in level 1, but you have to walk straight forward at a guy who's trying to punch you in the face and clinch him twice. So like, most people get knocked out. I just grabbed the dude. So I got super lucky, but yeah.
Well, I mean, so hang on.
It's a weird culture.
You have to go up to a guy.
Oh yeah, you're in a straight line.
Are you allowed to guard?
Kind of, sorta, but you're not. It's not a good idea because you're walking in a straight line. You can't go left or right.
Oh, so you can't cut the angle.
No, right? You just got to go straight in and clinch the guy.
Yeah, you're just going to get hit in the face.
Everyone gets hit in the face. The idea is actually to have you hit in the face. So
that you learn you can't run up and try to clinch a guy?
Yeah, exactly. I guess. Well, you're supposed to learn that the clinch works. And it was funny, too, because we did the American Gladiator sticks in basic training. They call it pugil sticks. Yeah. And I actually beat this really big Samoan guy. But when we were doing the grappling, I got him in a rear naked, to my credit. And this dude was so big. I'm about like 6'2". At the time, I weighed probably like 220. This dude was so strong that he reached over the back of his shoulder, grabbed the collar of my ACU jacket, and flipped me over his back with one hand.
Oh my God.
And I just tapped out. I'm like, you win, dude.
Yeah,
like, that's it.
I remember I did 2 years of BJJ in college, and it's very useful.
It's so useful.
Yeah, the two things that I remember most from that was I pulled off a textbook. Guillotine chokes are amazing just in general.
They are.
But I pulled off, and they're so easy to get people who don't know what they're doing into them.
Yeah, because it's like a headlock, and they don't think you're going to die.
Yeah, and then suddenly.
Yeah.
But I got this guy. He was way bigger and stronger than me, and I got him in a textbook arm bar. And what I did was I was kind of working my way past his guard. He was on his back, and I grabbed his arm, and I'm like, maybe I'm going to get this guy in an arm bar. And I start to pull, and he pulls back against me, and I'm like, And so what I did was I pushed his arm. I had no plan whatsoever. I just pushed his arm towards him. And this prompted him to reflexively push back. And as soon as he pushed back, I pulled it and boom, straight into an arm bar, and he tapped out.
I can feel that. I can feel that in my shoulder right now.
Yeah, I remember that. And I remember this one cheerleader at my college, little girl, like maybe, I mean, woman, but she was maybe 115 pounds soaking wet. I had helped her with the guillotine choke, and she wound up choking out like a football player.
Yeah, it's all leverage. That's what people don't get. And it's funny that we're talking about this, but it kind of does go back to the capitalist culture industry that we were talking about earlier, because these guys watch UFC, which is like heavily booked for certain styles of fighting, and it's heavily booked for certain people to win too, I would argue. And they watch action movies, which incorporate certain martial arts and not others. And they think that's how fighting works too, just like they think that's how society works. And they, like in the 80s and the 90s, people thought that like ninjas and kung fu and stuff was real. And then, they get violently disabused of that notion. and we're dealing with that now when people who think that society works on the terms that the capitalist culture industry defines vote for failed game show hosts to be president, and we're becoming violently disabused of that notion that that's how society works as well.
Exactly, and that you can solve problems by just applying more force.
Exactly.
So on that note, I mean,
I think we've got a lot of content on this one.
Is there anything else you want to ask me before I head out? Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I'm good, man. Thanks for coming on. If you ever want to have me on your channel, let me know. If you ever want to come on,
to have you again. You're great.
Yeah, let me know, man. And if you want to come on us again, let me know.
I would love to come on again because this is a blast, and honestly I could talk for another hour, but my wife probably needs me to watch my son. So for those of you guys who are listening, if you guys want to look me up, just Google Brenton Lengel or search Brenton Lengel on YouTube. You'll find all my plays. You'll find my website. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I am trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of August is what I'm hoping. I'm close to 750 right now. So you guys can help push me over the edge there, which would be really great. And you'll find lots of debates, including one I did on trans women in sports, the Sargon of Akkad.
Outstanding. So I always like to end these on a positive note, like just what are you reading? What are you watching? What video games are you playing? What's a positive thing in the world right now?
I'm playing Dark Souls 3. I'm replaying it again, and I'm playing as Hisoka Maru from Hunter x Hunter, which, by the way, is another reason why you should watch Hunter x Hunter, because he is easily the second best clown-based villain in all of fiction. He's terrifying. I'm taking care of my son, and I've got my comic Snow White Zombie. I just passed on the editor notes to my artist, and we're moving on the third issue as well. I will be getting out the second issue, and then hopefully we'll start a Kickstarter to finance the creation of the third, which is already underway. If you guys want to give to that, you can get some special edition books before this thing hopefully becomes incredibly popular and I lose my mind and withdraw. I go down the J.K. Rowling route, and then you guys can cancel me. Won't that be fun?
You'll say something negative about like Luxembourgers or something.
And we'll all go to Cancelvania, where everyone is problematic and everyone is canceled all the time.
I ain't going. I hate Medusas. All right, boss man. Thank you for coming on the show. I'll rip this. I'll have it up probably tomorrow afternoon.
Absolutely. This is a blast. I look forward to it. And after you put it up, let me know, and then I'll put this out on my YouTube channel as well.
Oh yeah. Put it out whenever you like, man. It doesn't matter.
Okay. I might put it out a little sooner then. All right.
Okay.
Catch you later.
Yeah, out, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye-bye.